Hello, everyone, and welcome to the West Hollywood COVID-19 webinar series. We will begin momentarily. We're just going to await a couple more minutes for the rest of everyone who registered to join us. Okay, I think we're ready to begin. Hello, everyone. My name is Paulo Casperdet with the City of West Hollywood, and welcome to the West Hollywood COVID-19 webinar series. Today's topic is how to protect your business from cyber threats. The City of West Hollywood has issued an emergency executive order aimed at assisting businesses and workers and has produced a toolkit for businesses affected by the coronavirus crisis. Information is available by going to the city's website at www.weho.org/coronavirus, where there are links to small business resources. For today's webinar, we'll have the city's business development analyst, Tara Warden, go over some local business relief measures. And then also for today's webinar, we have Ken and Michael from Swift Chip Inc., who will go over information on keeping your business safe from cyber threats. But before we begin today's webinar, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and will be emailed to all of those who registered. Additionally, the recording of the webinar will be available on our city's website and WehoTV channels, including our YouTube and CCTV cable channels. Please use the questions tab that's located on the right-hand side of your screen to ask questions of our panelists. Also, there's a polls tab located on the right-hand side of the screen where you can answer our questions and see results in real time. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Tara to talk over the local business relief measures.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another installation of our webinar series. Thank you, Paulo, and thank you, Michael and Ken, for helping us cover this very important topic. Before we dive right into that, I want to just briefly go over what the city has done in terms of local business relief measures. So just quickly, we've deferred some taxes and assessments that would be due otherwise during this period of local emergency. We've deferred the Business Improvement District assessment for both the Sunset Strip and the Design District. We've deferred business tax certificates for a 3-month basis. We've deferred regulatory business license fees on also a 3-month rolling basis. And we've deferred the transient occupancy tax that would typically be due for hotels. And we've been tolling the outdoor dining encroachment fees and valet meter encroachment fees, as our restaurants are not able to use that area of the street. Next slide. And in terms of additional business relief measures, we've loosened some restrictions to allow businesses more operate under the new Safer at Home county guidelines that are coming out. And some of those measures include allowing guests within hotels to provide to-go meals to non-guests, allowing off-site alcohol sales for restaurants offering to-go meals, allowing banners businesses featuring access to food without the regard to the location requirements that are indicated in our current zoning code, and allowed a temporary change of use from restaurants to a grocery store or market bodega type of scenario. And the city's we're constantly looking at additional ways to improve our response to our local business. And part of that response has been this webinar series, and we're constantly researching and trying to find additional technical assistance webinars that would be helpful for our business community. And with that, I would like to introduce Ken May, the CEO of SwiftChip. We also have Michael Paul on the call. He is the COO of SwiftChip. Ken will be doing the presentation today. He is a certified ethical hacker and has as you can see on the screen, a variety of very elite certifications that qualify him to present this information to our local business community. And now I will hand it over to Ken.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to share some of this with our community here. So I definitely enjoy taking questions from the public. So if you folks have any thoughts or questions or concerns about anything, or if you would like me to dive a little deeper into anything, please feel free to utilize the questions tab at the top, or you can even ask it in the chat area, and we'll be keeping an eye on things and making sure to address them as they come up. So there's been a lot going on with how all of us have been responding to this COVID-19 situation, right? Many people have been responding differently, and many businesses have been responding differently. So a lot of businesses are wondering, can we continue to do business as usual? Is it going to be possible? There's many different things that businesses have been attempting to do, including moving everything from the traditional local sort of a setup to a cloud-based or remote-based setup. But how do they do this? There's a lot of different ways that they can possibly implement plans like this, but it has to be done properly. A lot of businesses are wondering if they're going to be able to still maintain the same level of quality and security that they are used to being able to provide to their people on a remote basis. You guys able to see all my slides okay there? Awesome. Okay, great. Let's see if I can advance to this one here. All right. So Tara touched on this just a little bit about what's been expanded for some additional relief there and some additional openness. The state of California has a 4-stage plan, but the city of Los Angeles and the county there have sort of adopted what they call a 5-stage plan, which isn't terribly different from the state's broader plan. Right now we're in stage 2, so more businesses are starting to open back up. However, there was last week a statement that was made, although I looked around, I haven't seen anything really official in terms of dates on it, that they said the quarantine will with all certainty be extended for the next 3 months. So we'll see what happens with that. But one way or another, it looks like we're still going to be continuing to try to be safer at home for a while. And we're still going to have to face more supply chain disruptions. Luckily, it seems like toilet paper is starting to reappear on the shelves there, and other cleaning products and things. So hopefully you folks have been able to get a hold of those. But from a business standpoint, we have different challenges. We've been trying to, for example, be able to provide things like laptops to different clients, and being able to order them has been fairly difficult because everybody wants a laptop right now. So there's a huge backlog in some of those orders that we're trying to place there. Other challenges might be being able to have adequate bandwidth, for example. So suddenly everyone is trying to use the internet far more than we had before, and internet service providers are struggling pretty hard to be able to keep up. My screen seems to be kind of frozen here, so you guys might just need a pop-up over voice if a question pops up, because I'm not seeing anything refresh here. More businesses, unfortunately, are starting to lay off some workers and shut down. Even though there have been some relief packages in place, it still just hasn't been enough. So expect to see that continuing as well. I'm not going to dive terribly deep into the financial aspects of that, as I'm sure other presentations have been doing that as well. You guys may have been familiar with some of the relief that's already come, the Paycheck Protection Program, the COVID-19 Economic Injury Disaster Loan, or EIDL. It looks like they have been talking also about doing some expanded unemployment benefits or additional stimulus payments as well. And also, of course, the CARES Act has been released out there. So there's been a lot of stuff happening with it, but reality is, how can we protect ourselves, right? So we've all moved to, or at least many of us have moved to, a more remote work type of situation. But at least in the beginning, it was done pretty haphazardly by a lot of businesses. And so there were a lot of problems with this. One of the initial companies that really came to the forefront of all this was Zoom. And people still have a lot of concerns about it. And we don't like to prioritize any particular vendors over any other vendors, especially when it comes to remote meeting. I mean, after all, we're on a different platform right now. However, it is one of the more popular ones. And so I want to make sure that we communicate a little bit about some best practices with using things like Zoom or other streaming video platforms, because a lot of you guys are using it, and a lot of companies are still using different sorts of tools to be able to do this. So Zoom in particular, there were some security concerns at first, and they seem to have addressed quite a few of those. The 5.0 release just came out within the last couple weeks, and they've pushed it out as mandatory, which is good. Previously, you had the option to set a password for publicly shared meetings. Now it's the default. You'd have to actually turn that off. Whatever platform you're on, it's a good idea to make sure you've got some kind of a password for the meetings. And it may not be that you want to include that password in the same spot where you've got the links for the meetings. So maybe you share it on Facebook. Don't necessarily put that password directly in the Facebook event announcement. Maybe you email it out later to the list of registered attendees. The purpose of this is that we want to avoid what people have been calling the Zoom bombing, but you could call it by any other name, where people who really have nothing to do but with the meeting but troll are connecting and causing all kinds of problems, saying inappropriate things. If you don't control who can share the screens there, then they may even be displaying inappropriate things up on the screens and causing all kinds of chaos as well. So as a meeting organizer, take some time and thoroughly be sure to look over your meeting settings before you send that link out to everybody, because sometimes you can't make changes to the meeting settings after you've already created that meeting and sent the link out. And you want to make sure you know exactly who's going to be able to chat. Can they send private messages to each other? Can the attendees share screens? Can the attendees share files? Can they if they're sending files, you might also want to make sure that you're not clicking random links from people. And this is really just general good advice. You wouldn't necessarily accept a package from a stranger, so don't click a link from a stranger when you have no idea what's inside it or what it's pointing to. There had been also, in particular with Zoom, some concerns about people being able to steal passwords with particularly crafted links, but that's since been fixed. So at least that's one less thing that we have to worry about. Any questions so far before I continue along? I'm going to have to go by voice feedback because I can't see. my meeting screen is frozen here.
No questions yet. You're good.
Beautiful. Thank you. All right. So other ways that we can protect ourselves. The number one thing of any security settings that you can possibly do to protect yourself is going to be multi-factor authentication. Many of you have already used this in some shape or form, probably when trying to log into a banking website or something like that. It might require that you punch in a 6-digit code that it texts to you, or perhaps you have to use an authenticator app or something along those lines. There's even ones where a robot voice will call you and give you a code and you punch that in. The reason this is so important is that it's not uncommon for people to, one way or another, get their passwords compromised. It could be some third-party website had a security problem and their database of usernames, email addresses, and passwords gets compromised. So what the bad guys will do, what the hackers will do, is take this database And they'll make a tool that simply does what they call a credential reuse attack. They'll say, well, if so-and-so used this username and password for eBay, maybe they use this same username and password for Amazon. And they just try thousands and thousands and thousands of times for all these different accounts across many different types of websites, including email and things like that. And unless there's something like multi-factor authentication enabled, they're possibly be able to get in if those credentials were the same. That also kind of ties into this one here about not reusing passwords in the first place. I know it may seem somewhat tedious to have hundreds of different passwords to go along with all the hundreds of different sites and apps that we use all the time. But what's the alternative? Is that if somebody compromises you once, they've compromised you for everything. So even with multi-factor authentication, that's good. That should prevent the vast majority of these, but better to be safe than sorry. So you'll want to use something like a secure password manager to store all those logins in there. So that way you don't have them sitting around in some kind of a file somewhere. So what often happens is people either reuse the same username and password all over the place so they don't have to worry about remembering it, or they're going to create a Word document or an Excel document or something like that. And they might name it something fancy so they think like, oh, no one's going to be able to tell what this says. But the reality is that if someone's able to get into your system, they've got tools that can actually search for these different types of files, no matter what you name it, no matter if you put a password on it or anything. So it's much, much better to be able to put it into a hardened, encrypted, secure application. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, if we're dealing with sensitive information, especially if we're transmitting information back and forth between our corporate office and our home network, where many of us are working from right now, you have to make sure you're doing that in a protected fashion as well. So you want to use something like a VPN. Some companies allow their employees to be able to simply remote directly into their systems, but that can be very dangerous because there could be somebody listening in on that connection. Somebody could be connected at any point in that chain and possibly sniff out unencrypted information like usernames or passwords or intellectual property, IP, right? So a VPN is a virtual private network. It makes a little tunnel between your location and the remote location and make sure that anybody listening in won't be able to sniff any traffic. It just looks like gibberish. And it might even be completely free depending on how they're set up. So it's definitely something that you would want to talk to your office about and see if it's appropriate for what your needs are. Now, because a lot of us are working from home, we don't have access to the thousands and thousands of dollars of expertise and high-end hardware and software protecting our home networks that the businesses have invested in their corporate networks. So we've got what? We've got home routers, the ones that either were given to us by our internet company or someone went to Best Buy and bought off the shelf there. And that's okay, that's fine. However, the vast majority of these have default passwords. They're getting a little bit better about it now, but still many, many, many of these devices, you can simply go online and look up what's the default username and password. It's really helpful if you're a technician and you're trying to get into it to set it up, but it's not so great from a security situation if you've never changed it. So definitely make sure that when it was set up, somebody changed the default password, or if you're not sure, have someone who's familiar with how to do these sorts of things, check it and change the default password. And make sure you keep that stored in your password manager, because if you can't get back into it when you need to, that could be a problem. Another really key thing is that information security, cybersecurity, is really a game of cat and mouse. We are constantly protecting our devices and updating the software on them to keep the bad guys out. And the bad guys are really good at finding bugs and glitches and holes in software, in code, and in hardware in order to get in. I spend time working as what they call a network penetration tester. So businesses hire my company to try to hack into their equipment so we can find the holes before the bad guys do. Well, a lot of those holes get fixed regularly by updating what they call firmware or software on the routers, on the firewalls, on the modems, on all these different things. So on your home router, make sure that somebody is keeping that firmware up to date from time to time, because there's a lot of devices out there that somebody can even potentially hack directly across the internet. And you really don't necessarily want someone anywhere in the world to be able to get into your home network. And of course, from a business standpoint, if they can get into that network, they could potentially get into the business network as well, right?
Ken, and I think that's a really good point. D. Ramos here wrote in our chat, and they said, don't forget to keep your desktops and laptops updated with the latest security patches. And I think that kind of goes to the point that you were just making on making sure that you're continually updating the software and firmware.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have a slide talking about that a little bit later on as well, I believe. But certainly everything that applies to the router applies to all technology. We have to update our phones from time to time to make sure that the software is up to date and protected on there. We have to update the laptops, not just the operating system like Windows or Mac OS, but also the programs that run on top of it too, like Microsoft Office, for example, and Adobe products. In fact, there was a period of time where something like, I don't know, it was a huge number, a huge percentage of website hacks were done through out-of-date Adobe Flash. Now that's fallen out of favor for a lot of reasons, but it just goes to show you how sometimes it's just a single point of failure that's pretty easy to keep up to date. Were there any other questions, or was that the only one so far?
One so far. We got a quiet group here.
No worries, no worries. All right. So the remote computers that your employees are using must be managed machines. So what I mean is either your internal IT department, or if you use an outsourced IT support company like my own, make sure that even if it's a personal machine that the person is using, talk to your HR department, talk to your legal department. But if you're going to allow that personal machine to connect to company resources, it has to be managed. And this ties into what we were just talking about with software updating and all that. We have software that does monitoring as well, that's looking for hundreds of different data points, looking for virus infection, looking for ransomware, looking for all sorts of odd behavior. And that's just not happening on an unmanaged home machine. So when you allow these home machines, even if there's a VPN connection, you're just giving them a tunnel straight into the business environment where they could do anything, and you have no idea. It's a complete black horse device. You may also have data loss prevention software, DLP software, in the corporate environment that's preventing people from being able to make undesired copies or exfiltrating data. So maybe you don't want a remote salesperson to be able to make themselves an entire copy of your client database, right? 46% of employees, according to Cisco, say they admit to transferring files from work to home anyway. You want to make sure you have some way of monitoring that. Now, no amount of technology at all is going to be able to compare with having a well-educated and vigilant employee. So end user cybersecurity training is going to be very, very, very high up on the list of things that you can possibly do. It has to be an ongoing thing, right? Technology is constantly changing. There's new threats, there's new attacks that the bad guys are doing. So we have to come up with ways to be able to prevent these sort of things and to educate ourselves for what to look for. In a few slides, in fact, I'm going to cover some examples of COVID-19 specific phishing emails and how you can identify what sort of nefarious stuff they're up to. So just to give you a little taste of that sort of thing. A recent study said that less than half of employees report that they believe they get adequate training. So you might want to check with your staff. Even if you believe you're doing enough training, do they feel like they're getting enough training? There might be some gaps there. Now, we also spend a lot of time focused on compliance. So HIPAA compliance if you're a medical office, or FINRA if you're a financial firm that does investments and things like that. PCI compliance if you accept credit cards. DFARS, and soon CMMC if you're a Department of Defense contractor or subcontractor. All these remote workers and all these remote machines still have to meet all those same compliance requirements that your office has. So you may have gotten certified as being compliant with your business network and infrastructure. That's great. Good for you. However, probably all these endpoints may not have been included in that equation. So you might have to completely redo your audit to make sure you're still maintaining compliance there, because oftentimes there's significant gaps. And it's not just one large network, your office network, that you're talking about now. Now you're talking about dozens or hundreds or even thousands of networks, because you have to include the employee's home network as well, since they're still going to be interacting with company information, right? Let me give you an example of how training makes a big difference. And you can tie that into policies and procedures. So I was hired to do a penetration test for a entertainment related company in Hollywood. I know, shock, right? An entertainment related company in Hollywood? What? So they wanted to make sure that the company that they were paying to maintain their technology and keep them up to date and secure was doing a good job, and that we wanted to find any gaps before someone who wasn't supposed to found them. So on my first day of the attack, I noticed they had a gated parking lot. And so I said, okay, we're going to test the physical security here. So this is a perfect example. So I pull up to a little squawk box, and there's no camera on it or nothing. And I press the button, and the person responds, hello. I said, hey, I'm here to see so-and-so. I was wondering if I could park in the lot. And the name of the person I quoted was it was my contact, but my name was specifically not on a list anywhere. And so I could have just pulled it off of their website. I could have been anybody. So they let me into the parking lot. So already we had kind of a training breakdown right there, right? Now, they had those RFID badges where you have to put the card up to the door to be able to get in. And I am trained on how to bypass those things. And I'm sitting there thinking about, okay, how am I going to approach this? What sort of techniques am I going to use? And starting to spin up all sorts of very high-tech, complex sort of plans. And as I get out of my car, I notice one of the back doors is just standing open, completely propped open. And I thought, oh, come on, it can't be this easy, right? So I grabbed my bag of gear, and again, my picture's not posted anywhere. No one else is aware I'm going to be doing this. I have no identifying badge. I'm just stranger off the street at this point, right? So I walk into the building. As I'm walking down the hallway, I noticed that there's a conference room nearby, and it looks like there were some people, some contractors who were installing a TV in there, and they had just decided to prop the door open to make it easier to move gear back and forth. I have no idea how long the door was open. It was open for at least a good 20 to 30 minutes that I noticed while I was there, but it could have been open for much longer before that. So I walked an entire circuit of the bottom floor to see if I would be challenged by anybody, and I wasn't. Nobody stopped me at all. So just total stranger off the street, walked right in and was able to have access to the building. So we just had multiple points where even it wasn't a lot of technology involved in there necessarily. We could have stopped a lot of that with technology, right? Maybe we could have had a camera pointed at a few different places and somebody monitoring that stuff. But nobody had been trained to challenge me. Nobody had been trained to verify my identity before I entered the building or the parking lot. And literally, I could have just simply walked up to a computer and plugged in a device and started stealing data right away. Instead, I walked to my contact and said, hey, how you doing? I said, good morning. Are you ready to start? And I said, well, actually, I already started, and we should probably talk first before I continue. So it's a good example there of where training can really make quite a big difference there. So let's talk a little bit about being able to identify phishing emails, for example. The hackers are smart, right? They know how to tie into human behavior. And so they know that a lot of us are kind of scared and looking for more information. And so they'll send us an email like this. So can someone who's in the meeting give me a reason why this email might look like it might not necessarily be legit? I've highlighted a couple fields here to maybe make it a little more obvious. It might be a little small on your screen. Anybody willing?
Tara actually chimed in here and said gov.org.
Yeah, so this is an email purporting to be from the CDC. And you look at the name and it says, oh, the name of this person is CDC info. That sounds legit. When you actually look at the domain of the company sending the email, it's this cdc-gov.org. That could be anybody, right? Well, the rest of the email looks kind of okay. And you can even see the link here does say cdc.gov, not this cdc-gov.org. However, if you were to hover your mouse over the link, not click on it, but even just hold the mouse over it, you would see that that same domain would actually pop up. And so what they're trying to do here, what the hacker's trying to do, is convince you to click on this link so that way you'll be taken to a site that they control. And in this case, it's probably going to try to steal your credentials. It's going to say something like, click here to log in with Gmail, or click here to log in with Office 365, or click here to log in with Facebook. And then you type in your credentials, and it might just give you an error message, or it might even like pass it through, and you'll actually be able to get in. But meanwhile, they've stolen your credentials. So another example, which might even be more subtle, is here we've got an email from someone that maybe we know. Maybe this is a completely legitimate person, an email address that we're familiar with, and it's even coming from an actual person that we're used to, and it says we got a document through OneDrive and we can access it by clicking the button below. Well, again, if you were to hover your mouse over this link, you get a pop-up and you can see it might be a really bizarre, complex sort of a link. But again, it's not actually from Karen. Her account may have been compromised or spoofed, where it's coming from someone that isn't actually them and they're making it look like it's from them. And this link is going to take you again to another website where they're going to try and convince you to steal your credentials. This is another perfect reason why end user training is critical, but also multi-factor authentication again, because even if they did steal your credentials, which is bad, they still shouldn't be able to get in because they're going to be missing that extra factor, that 6-digit code from your authenticator app, or that's going to get texted to you or something like that. And then we should be alerted that somebody's trying to log in and failing the credentials and know to reset your account. Any questions on those before I move on?
Questions on those?
Awesome. All right, so what other methods can we use to protect ourselves? So much of our communication is happening digitally right now, whereas we might pick up a phone and talk to somebody down the hall, or even just walk down the hall to go to talk to somebody. We're sending more emails than ever. So you want to make sure that you've got some kind of enhanced email security for your company. Something that's not just scanning for viruses and bad attachments. You know, those are important things to block too, but that's actually applying some intelligence and looking at things. For example, Office 365 has something called advanced threat protection, where you can designate certain VIPs, and I think Google has a similar sort of thing, where it'll apply a little extra scrutiny to them. So it says it's coming from the CEO. However, and it's got his email signature and everything like that. However, the actual email address looks to be different, or there's something else that's off about it. So it'll just give it that little extra attention to try to block as many of these as it possibly can. But hackers know how to exploit our emotion. We still occasionally will get hit up by friends of ours from the industry that say, hey, let me get your take on this. And I'll say, okay. And they'll say, well, I've got a client who they've got a new secretary, and she got some text messages from her boss that said, hey, I'm about to get on an airplane and I need you to wire X amount of dollars to this account because this deal needs to close. I'm going to get on the plane, so I won't be able to answer. So please just make it happen. Well, it's a new employee, right? So they want to make their boss happy and look good at their job, and so they may be more likely to do it. They're scared of not performing well, and they're more likely to make mistakes. We actually had a client where one of the employees had gotten a spam email that claimed to be from the CFO or their accountant. I think it was the CFO, and it was an obviously bad one. But the real kicker is that it requested her to buy $200 of eBay gift cards and send them to her. I mean, we're struggling to think of what legitimate situation where a business is going to need to, in an emergency, buy $200 of eBay gift cards and send it off to each other by email. But this person did that. So that was a loss for them. So that person definitely needed to get some enhanced training on how to recognize fraud and threats. And we want to make sure and keep our communication between employees strong. This is important not just from an educational perspective, but also from a morale and a team building and a culture perspective, right? We don't get to see each other as much as we often do. Hopefully that'll be changing soon. But for the meantime, have more regular team meetings, have more regular time to check in with your employees. If you're the boss, give everybody a call once a day just to check in, see how they're doing. We need to roll out the red carpet for communication right now, because it can't just be strictly information-based communication at this point. The employees are people too, right? And people that are scared, they're gonna have strong emotions, right? Lots of people are scared right now, so they're going to be less likely to potentially put on their thinking cap when they may be faced with a possible fraud situation. So all key things to keep in mind. Sometimes it really doesn't take much to be able to compromise a company. And if we don't have any questions at the moment, then I'll tell you a little story of how really just one tiny little hack was able to get me access to an entire company. So I'll share this story with you. So again, another entertainment related company. They were pretty confident that their security was rock solid because they said, we all have Macs. So, oh, okay. All right. Well, we'll see what we can do. I said, yeah, well, you probably aren't going to be able to hack into anything because it's all Macs. Okay. Tell me about your setup. I said, well, we've got about 30 people with laptops, with MacBooks, and we've got good Wi-Fi equipment, good firewall, good router, all that sort of stuff. We do voice over IP phones, VoIP phones, right? And we do have a Mac Mini that's like a little file share on the network, but everything's locked down with permissions, and the wireless machines can't talk to the wired machines, and the voice data traffic is all separate from the rest of the traffic, so nobody can sniff in or intercept or do anything with it. So, okay, great, sounds good. So day one, I start my penetration test, and this was one of those buildings where you have to check in with security, and then you have to swipe a badge on the elevator for it to allow you to switch to a different floor. So I decided to time my approach for when everybody was getting there first thing in the morning. So there's lots of people. So I put a just random concert lanyard around my neck with some keys around it and some just random like, oh, okay, it's an Ozfest one or something, you know, just a bunch of stuff just so it looked professional, and some random blank RFID badges. And I timed my approach to the office with a group of people and just walked right in with them, and wasn't challenged by security at all. I get to the elevator and fumbled around for my badge and said, oh, I've got the wrong one. Would someone mind swiping for me so I can get to my office, and I'll call my wife and have her send my badge over? And someone said, yeah, no problem. So they swiped me, and I was able to get to the floor I needed. So already we've got multiple failures there, right? So I get off the elevator and I pull out my phone and I start looking for wireless signals, because I knew where the office was, but I wanted to see how far out their Wi-Fi signal extended. And sure enough, they had really good, strong Wi-Fi equipment. So strong that it went all the way down the hall with very strong bars. In fact, it completely covered the restroom on that floor, which wasn't a locking restroom. So if I wanted to, I could have just sat in the, in one of the stalls and just set up shop and completely been able to focus on hacking them through their Wi-Fi. Well, I wanted to be a little more comfortable than that. So I went ahead and went into the office, and they sat me down at an empty desk so I could do my thing. And I really only did one little hack here to get me onto the network. I did something called a deauthentication attack. So I made my machine send a bunch of wireless noise in the air to temporarily disrupt people's cell phones and laptops that were connected to the network, because I wanted them to reconnect to the network. You see, with Wi-Fi, when you connect to the network, there's enough information in that data packet when it connects to the network that somebody could potentially take that data packet and crack it. They could run it on a password cracking machine to try and reverse engineer what the password was. So I did that. I captured one of the password hashes, is what it's called, and I was able to crack the password. And so I was on the Wi-Fi. Great. This was all in the space of about an hour from getting out of my car to having this hash. So once I'm on the Wi-Fi network, I start sniffing for data to see what can I see, right? Now, when you're on a wired network, you have to be plugged into the right wire to be able to sniff the right data, right? Everything's all split out across different wires. Well, with Wi-Fi, the wire is the air. It's everything, right? So I can sit here and I can sniff everything that's going through the air, all the wireless data from all the machines. Well, I start realizing as I'm looking in my software, we'll use a tool called Wireshark, and I'm looking at the types of data packets that I'm sniffing from the air, and I can see voice traffic. I was like, wait a minute. So I run some tests, and I come to find out that turns out the voice network and the wired network and the wireless network were not separate at all. I was able to transfer data back and forth between all three of those networks. So I didn't do it because it would have been a violation of privacy, but if I had wanted to, I could have captured voice traffic and simply replayed it to be able to listen in on stored communications. And there's even some ways to be able to play it back in real time as well. So obviously, huge privacy concern there, right? Well, it gets better. So I start looking around on the network, and of course I see their Mac Mini server. And yes, it has some shares on it, and they are locked down with permissions, and I don't have the account information, so that's fine. Well, there was another share on there that didn't have any permissions set on it, and it was just called downloads. And I said, okay, well, let's take a look and see what's in there. And boy, was I surprised, because this folder that was open to everybody to be able to read and write and delete files from had an email archive on it from the VP of the company from about 3 months prior. So I thought to myself, come on, this can't be true. So I make a copy of the file and I start looking through it, and sure enough, it's a copy of her email archive, and it has things like she gets her voicemails sent to her email as attachments, so you could potentially listen in on those. Copy of their constant contact database. Now, again, this is an entertainment company, so we're talking about high-profile celebrities and figures in the industry, and some political figures and things like that. Just lots and lots of very, very, very sensitive information. So that was enough that I just took a few more scans and started preparing a report and had a chat with them about how this had come about. Come to find out that the VP had gotten a new MacBook recently, and so the tech that had been working on it at the time had just decided to temporarily make an archive of her email account so he could copy it to the new one and import it on the new one so she'd have all of her email. I don't know why he decided to do it that way, but that's what he did. And he just forgot to delete it afterwards. So I was able to deeply compromise an entire company, and there's just one tiny little hack. The actual hack was just hacking that Wi-Fi packet. But I do an example walkthrough video on how that's done on a YouTube video I did recently, and it's like a 3 to 5 minute long video. So this is trivial stuff, but it illustrates several important points. We can't be complacent and think that just because we have expensive gear or gear that has great security, that it's been configured properly. right? So we might have really, really good stuff, and Apple gear is great gear, and their Wi-Fi gear was good gear too, but it hadn't been configured properly. We have to have good policies and procedures and training for our people, right? Because we don't want them to potentially leave critical, sensitive information in a publicly available place. So that story, I think, is really useful because this business had a huge, huge liability and had no idea. And that's exactly why we do these types of things, is to be able to try to prevent someone who's not supposed to have access to data like that from being able to come across it. So with that, if you need help, we are very happy to help. SwiftChip is based out of the Los Angeles area and also Ventura County. And we do not just generalized IT support, but also cybersecurity engagements as well. Do we have any other questions in the meantime?
No other questions, but I definitely think that this presentation was really well informed and interesting on how simple, quick maneuvers can hack a whole company. I mean, it's scary out there.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of it is psychology based. I mean, people think about the high-tech, brilliant guru hacker, but it really doesn't take a very high skill level to be able to do a lot of these different attacks. So if you take even just one thing away from this presentation, make sure that every single program and web app you use that has a login, you're turning on multi-factor authentication. If you do nothing else, do that. Microsoft had released a report recently that said something like 99.5% of all compromised accounts that they discovered would have been protected. They would have been thwarted if they had MFA turned on.
Well, yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing statistics and looking at the information. I think this is also really helpful for people in vulnerable populations that might look at some emails and think that they're legitimate when in fact they're just spam emails, to say a better word for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's lots of great free resources out there for education as well. So we want to make sure, particularly people that are in more sensitive groups or people that don't have as much access to higher end education, are getting as much training as they can possibly get. And it's all out there. You can learn all the stuff without paying a dime. But if you're a business, definitely invest in some sort of a ongoing training type program.
Great. Well, thank you, Ken, and thank you, Michael, both for a really great presentation and a great webinar. I think that concludes our webinar for today. But as always, if you want to stay up to date with the City of West Hollywood's coronavirus efforts, please visit us by going to www.weho.org/coronavirus. That's it for today. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you again, Ken and Michael.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful day, folks.
Thanks.